It was a
Another
quiet
cup of
dinner at
coffee
a small
for you,
Nevada
hon.
diner.
Oh,
The kind of
thank you
evening where
kindly.
conversations were low
Just
and
a
plates
splash.
clinked softly, until a 78-year-old widow, Martha Reed, was suddenly slapped across the face by local thug Brent Halpern, sending her crashing to the floor as the entire room froze in shock. No one dared move, no one dared speak, fear swallowing every corner of the diner, except the last booth in the back, where a quiet American veteran named Jim Walker slowly rose to his feet, his loyal German Shepherd Rex standing beside him with a low growl.
Pick on
No
someone your own
threats, no shouting,
size.
just a veteran and his dog stepping forward as the diner held its breath. This wasn't just a slap.
Stay out of this,
It was the
old
moment
man.
justice stood up. Dry Creek, a lonely desert town tucked between pale Nevada ridges, always carried a harsh stillness at dusk. The air was cold, thin, and sharp, rolling across Highway 93 with a dry whistle that pushed dust across the empty street. Lone Spur Diner, an old neon-lit building with chipped red paint and a flickering horse logo, was the only warm place open for miles. Inside, Jim Walker, a 50-year-old American veteran with short military-cut hair, a weathered jawline, and quiet steel blue eyes, sat in the back corner. His German Shepherd, Rex, 5 years old, muscular, black and tan with alert amber eyes, lay calmly at his feet. Jim preferred silence, routine, and spaces where no one asked questions. At another booth near the window sat Martha Reed, a 78-year-old widow with silver hair tied loosely at the back and a cream wool sweater pulled close to her thin frame. Her hands, veined and fragile, rested on a leather purse older than some of the chairs in the diner. Martha was known for her gentle smile and soft-spoken nature. She was the sort of woman who remembered every birthday but forgot to buy anything for herself. Tonight, she simply wanted soup and a quiet evening after visiting the small patch of land she refused to sell, her late husband's last gift. Lucy Harmon, the diner's waitress, moved between tables with practiced steps. She was in her late 20s, slim, with wavy chestnut hair tied in a messy ponytail and freckles scattered across her fair cheeks. Lucy worked double shifts to support her younger brother, and everyone in town knew she had a backbone stronger than she looked. Though burnout shadowed her hazel eyes, she always managed a polite smile. She approached Martha's table with a steaming pot of coffee, refilling her cup without needing to be asked. The bell above the door clanged sharply as 3 men entered. Leading them was Brent Halpern, a burly construction boss in his early 50s. His face was red-blotched, rough as scraped brick, and half covered by a patchy beard. His belly pushed against his stained work jacket, and a thick silver ring wrapped around his middle finger, his favorite intimidation piece. Brent had been drinking. The bitter stench clung to him. The 2 men behind him were younger workers, both stocky and expressionless, following like obedient shadows. Conversations died instantly the moment Brent stepped inside. Brent walked straight toward Martha, heavy boots thudding like threats across the worn wooden floor. "Evening, Miss Reed," he said with a slurred smirk. "Thought you and I had business to settle." Martha looked up, her pale blue eyes calm but wary. "My land is not for sale," she said softly. Brent leaned down, breath smelling of whiskey and dust. "Your land sits right beside the reservoir project. My boss wants it. That means I want it." His 2 men chuckled low. Lucy froze behind the counter, her hand sliding discreetly toward her phone. When Martha repeated her refusal, Brent's demeanor snapped. The diner became a vacuum of silence. With a sudden twist of anger, he lifted his arm and struck her across the cheek. The slap cracked like a gunshot. Martha fell sideways, her small frame hitting the floor hard, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. Customers stared into their plates, refusing to look. Fear wrapped around the room like barbed wire. Lucy's phone shook in her hand as she secretly hit record. Her breath caught in her throat. From the back of the diner, Jim's chair scraped against the tile. He rose slowly, his posture calm but solid as an iron beam. Rex stood immediately, ears forward, a low, warning growl vibrating from his chest. Jim's boots echoed as he walked toward the center of the diner. He didn't hurry. He didn't bark orders. His eyes alone carried a warning. Steady, controlled, the kind of stare that came from years of surviving things worse than men like Brent. Brent turned, surprised to see someone standing at all. Jim crouched first beside Martha, gently helping her sit up. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low, steady, reassuring. Martha's cheek was already flushing red, tears welling but not falling. "I'm all right," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Jim draped her shawl back around her shoulders before rising to face Brent. Rex stepped in front slightly, teeth hidden but ready. Brent's smirk faltered. He muttered, "Mind your business, stranger." Jim's expression didn't change. "When you hit a woman like that," he said evenly, "it becomes my business." The room stayed frozen as Brent tried to reassert dominance. His jaw twitched, fists clenching, but he hesitated when Jim stepped closer. Calm, unblinking, immovable. The younger workers shifted uneasily. Even they sensed Brent was punching above his weight. "Back off, old man," Brent grumbled. Jim answered, "Walk away." Something in Brent's eyes flickered, the brief spark of someone realizing he no longer controlled the room. After a tense beat, he exhaled sharply, spat on the floor, and jerked his head at his men. "Let's go!" As the door slammed behind them, the diner slowly regained breath. Lucy rushed over, helping Martha to her feet. Jim guided the elderly woman back to her booth, checking her cheek for swelling. Lucy whispered, "I recorded everything." Her voice shook, but her resolve was firm. Jim nodded once. "Good." He returned to his table, Rex sitting tall beside him, still alert. In the uneasy quiet, the significance of the moment settled like dust. The slap, the fear, the man who stood, and the truth now caught on video. Dry Creek had always been silent, but tonight, justice had taken its first step. Jim Walker drove slowly through the darkened outskirts of Dry Creek, the headlights carving pale lines through the dust as he guided his old pickup toward the small wooden house where Martha Reed lived. The night was cold, harsher than usual, with a wind that carried sand and a strange silence that made the whole town feel abandoned. Martha, still shaken, sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in her shawl, her thin hands trembling slightly. Rex, sitting tall in the back seat, kept his eyes fixed on the road as if guarding them from the darkness beyond the glass. Jim had intended to leave town by morning, heading north for seasonal work. But something about the slap, about the fear in that diner, had settled in his chest like a stone he couldn't ignore. When Jim walked Martha to her porch, she unlocked the door of her small house. A weathered cabin with peeling white paint and a sagging roof. Inside, the warm glow of a lamp softened the room. The shelves were lined with photos, her late husband in miner's gear, smiling with soot-covered cheeks. Martha in her younger years. The small patch of land by the lake, taken decades earlier. Jim took a slow breath, noticing how the home itself felt fragile, like one strong wind could take it. Martha motioned for him to sit, and though Jim preferred distance, he lowered himself into the old armchair patched with fabric. Her eyes, blue and dim but still strong, looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Over a cup of weak chamomile tea, Martha finally told the story she had guarded for years. The land by Hollow Reservoir, her husband's last gift, was not just sentimental. It was where he proposed, where they planned to build a cabin, where he wanted to retire after leaving the mines. But he never made it. He died in a tunnel collapse 30 years earlier, one of the worst accidents Dry Creek ever saw. Martha kept the land as a promise to him. Recently, developers from Las Vegas began pushing to buy every parcel around the lake. Their project, Silver Basin Retreat, was led by a man named Victor Crane, a powerful, sharp-dressed figure known for turning quiet towns into profit machines. According to whispers, Crane never took no for an answer. Martha's voice lowered to a fearful hush when she described what had happened to other residents. A family living on the north side of the reservoir lost their home in a suspicious electrical fire. Another neighbor vanished overnight, supposedly moving away to Texas, though no one ever heard from them again. A single mother who owned a small cabin by the shore had been visited repeatedly by men in construction vests, and 2 weeks later, she left Dry Creek without a word. The pattern was unmistakable. Anyone refusing to sell was pushed out until they gave in, or disappeared. Jim felt his jaw tighten as he listened, recognizing the signs of organized pressure, intimidation, and control. He had seen similar tactics overseas. New names surfaced, ones Jim had not heard until now. Sheriff Earl Duffy, a tall, heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a face carved by years of authority, had once been respected. But lately, the sheriff had grown distant, rarely patrolling, often seen entering and leaving the mayor's office late at night. Mayor Leonard Briggs, a man in his 40s with slicked-back blonde hair and an expensive suit that looked far too polished for a town this poor, was known for his charming speeches and hollow promises. Martha whispered that she saw envelopes exchanged between the two men and Crane's representatives. Dry Creek wasn't just struggling. It was under control. Jim leaned back, taking in every detail. Rex sat by his feet, sensing Jim's tension, the dog's ears pricking at every sound outside. Jim considered the situation carefully. He had spent years drifting from place to place, always moving before trouble found him. But this wasn't random trouble. This was a town being choked by fear, older than the one in the diner, one that spread quietly, room by room, until everyone felt alone. Jim remembered Martha on the floor, the look in her eyes. Not just pain, but resignation, as if she expected no one to help. He couldn't shake that image. The wind outside intensified, rattling the old window frames. Martha stood, walking slowly to retrieve a metal box from a shelf. Inside were letters from her husband, their edges yellowed and fragile. At the bottom lay the original deed to the land by the reservoir. She placed it on the table with trembling hands. "If they take this," she whispered, "I'll have nothing left of him." Jim felt something heavy settle inside. He wasn't a savior, wasn't a hero, but he knew injustice when he saw it. And he knew what happened when good people stayed silent. Jim walked to the door, opening it slightly to inspect the quiet road outside. Dry Creek was darker than usual, as if the town itself held its breath. A single patrol car drove past slowly, its headlights dim, barely illuminating the cracked asphalt. The sheriff's car. The timing made Jim's skin crawl. He closed the door gently, scanning the windows, noticing how many of them lacked curtains. Perfect for spying in. Rex growled softly, confirming Jim's instincts. Someone was watching. Turning back to Martha, Jim spoke calmly, though his voice carried a firmness he rarely used. "I'll stay a while," he said, "at least until this settles." Martha's shoulders sagged in relief, tears filling her eyes. She nodded repeatedly, gripping his hand with surprising strength. Jim didn't make promises lightly, but he felt the weight of this one settle into place. Rex pressed against his leg as if approving the decision. Jim wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew this town needed someone willing to stand up. Before leaving, Jim and Rex checked around the property, walking the perimeter under the moonlit sky. The land felt exposed, the fences old and worn, the yard littered with the remains of past seasons. Jim noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt along the side road, prints too large for ordinary town cars. He crouched, touching the soil. Whoever had come through passed recently, maybe hours earlier. Rex sniffed the ground, tail stiff. Jim's instincts sharpened. Something was coming. When they returned to the porch, Martha stood at the door, watching them anxiously. Jim reassured her with a nod. He told her to lock the windows and leave a light on through the night. As he walked back to his truck, Rex following, Jim felt the cold settle deeper into his bones. But so did resolve. Dry Creek might be small, but the forces behind its fear were not. Victor Crane, Sheriff Duffy, Mayor Briggs, they were threads in the same web. The slap in the diner wasn't just violence, it was a warning, and now Jim had stepped into the center of it. He drove away slowly, watching Martha's porch light fade in the rearview mirror. The desert wind swept across the dirt road like ghosts. Jim rubbed Rex's head, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're staying, boy." Rex nudged his arm, understanding more than most people ever would. The veteran drove back toward town, knowing full well the night was far from over, and the shadows of Dry Creek were only just beginning to move. The morning sun rose slowly over Dry Creek, casting pale gold across the cracked pavement and storefronts that barely opened anymore. Inside Lone Spur Diner, the chairs were still stacked, the smell of coffee lingering faintly in the air. Lucy Harmon stood behind the counter, her fingers trembling as she replayed the video she recorded the night before. Brent Halpern striking Martha Reed, the sound echoing even through the phone speakers. Lucy's eyes were red from lack of sleep, but her resolve had only sharpened. With a deep breath, she uploaded the clip to social media and typed a single caption. "Her name is Martha, 78. This is what greed does to the weak in Dry Creek." Then she hit post. Within an hour, Lucy's phone exploded with notification after notification. Her video spread like wildfire, first across Nevada, then far beyond. Comments poured in, anger, disbelief, sympathy, and rage towards the injustice unfolding in a quiet desert town. Veterans from across the country began sharing the post, tagging their organizations, calling for accountability. Lucy watched the screen in disbelief, hand covering her mouth as views climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Her heart pounded. She hadn't expected it to grow this fast. Part of her felt terrified, because in Dry Creek, attention came with consequences. Jim Walker sat at the small kitchen table inside his rented cabin on the edge of town, the desert wind rattling the windows. Rex lay near his boots, ears flicking at every gust of wind. Jim's inbox was overflowing, emails from fellow veterans, lawyers offering free representation, strangers thanking him for stepping in. A message from an old Marine buddy stood out. "Saw the clip. Proud of you, brother. If you need backup, you call." Jim stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and unease. He had never sought attention, especially not national attention. But now, the world seemed to be looking directly at Dry Creek. Meanwhile, inside the sheriff's office, Sheriff Earl Duffy sat hunched behind his desk, his large frame drooping beneath the weight of bad news. His thinning gray hair stuck to his forehead as he watched the viral clip playing on his computer monitor. The slap felt louder each time, echoing inside the small office like a threat. Duffy rubbed his temples. He was a man who once cared about the town, but years of financial trouble, a sick wife, and mounting debt had made him vulnerable to Victor Crane's offers. He felt trapped now, like a dog on a leash too short to escape. And that leash was tightening. Mayor Leonard Briggs stormed into the sheriff's office, his expensive navy suit almost glowing against the dingy beige walls. His blonde hair was perfectly combed, but his face twisted with fury. "Do you see this?" he snapped, slamming his phone onto Duffy's desk. "It's everywhere, every damn platform. Crane just called. He wants this buried." Briggs paced the room, adjusting his gold cufflinks with shaking fingers. Beneath the polished exterior, he was nervous, a man who enjoyed power but had never faced real danger. "Find the girl who posted it, and the veteran. Crane says they need to understand the consequences of stirring up trouble." Miles away, in a high-rise suite overlooking the neon lights of Las Vegas, Victor Crane watched the same video on a large digital screen mounted on his office wall. His dark salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and his jawline, sharp as a knife, tightened as he listened to the sound of the slap. Crane wore a charcoal gray suit tailored so perfectly it made him look carved from stone. His reputation was built on money, influence, and quiet threats. He hated disruptions, especially viral ones. Crane turned to his assistant, a stern woman in her 30s with short black hair and cold gray eyes named Dana Holt. "Handle this," he said softly, which made the words more threatening. "We can't let a small-town waitress and some drifter derail a multi-million-dollar project." Back in Dry Creek, Lucy stood outside the diner with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking quickly and quietly. Reporters had already emailed her. A veteran advocacy group wanted permission to organize a rally, and someone claiming to be an influencer with 4 million followers offered to do a story. But beneath the excitement was fear. Lucy knew the kind of men she had angered. When she walked back inside the diner, she found Jim waiting for her at a booth, Rex sitting at his feet. Lucy's shoulders sagged with relief. "You saw it?" she asked. Jim nodded slowly. His calm eyes looked straight into hers. "You did the right thing," he said, "but it's going to bring trouble." As Lucy sat down, she explained everything she had learned from customers, whispers she had collected over the past year. Strange incidents, threats disguised as warnings, construction workers watching houses at night. She lowered her voice. "People have been scared for so long, they stopped believing anything could change. But now, they're talking again." Jim listened quietly, his jaw tightening. He understood fear. He had lived around it long enough to recognize when a community was suffocating under it. He also knew that a spark, like Lucy's video, could either ignite hope or invite retaliation. The first strike came quickly. A black SUV drove slowly past the diner, windows tinted so dark they reflected the sunlight like mirrors. Rex lifted his head, ears pricking sharply. Jim watched it too, eyes narrowing. The SUV rolled by again, slower this time, before disappearing down the street. Lucy swallowed hard. "They already know," she whispered. Jim stood up, adjusting his parka. "Then we make sure we stay ahead of them." His voice was steady, but Lucy could see the readiness in his posture, like a soldier bracing for the next step. Across town, Sheriff Duffy reluctantly dialed Lucy's number, but hung up before it rang. He knew she wouldn't listen. He knew people were choosing sides. And for the first time in years, Duffy felt shame crawl up his spine. But he also felt fear. Fear of Crane, fear of losing his job, fear of what might happen to his wife if he crossed the wrong men. Still, as he watched the video again, something inside him stirred, a reminder of who he used to be. But fear won again, as it often did. As the sun dipped below the desert horizon, the tension in Dry Creek grew thicker, heavier, almost tangible. Jim stood outside the diner, watching the street, Rex seated firmly beside him. Jim wasn't sure what came next, legal threats, intimidation, or worse. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going anywhere. Not while people like Martha Reed were under threat. Not while corruption ran this deep. The clip had done more than expose a slap. It had drawn a line in the sand. And Jim Walker, for the first time in a long while, stepped across it willingly. The evening settled over Dry Creek like a heavy blanket, the sky fading into dusky purple while the street lamps flickered to life one by one. Lucy Harmon finished her shift at Lone Spur Diner and stepped outside, pulling her thin jacket tighter against the chill. Her nerves were on edge. Since the video went viral, she had felt eyes on her everywhere she went. The town, already quiet most nights, seemed unnaturally still now, as if holding its breath. Rex had sensed something earlier, and Jim warned Lucy to be cautious. But tonight, she tried to convince herself she was just tired. Lucy walked along the cracked sidewalk toward the employee parking lot behind the diner. The faint hum of a soda machine and the distant desert wind were the only sounds until she turned the corner. A man leaned against her car. A deputy she recognized. Deputy Ray Mullins, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with thinning blonde hair and a puffy, red-cheeked face. Mullins had a reputation for being rough, taking side jobs for cash, and drinking on duty. His posture was lazy but threatening, arms crossed, a smirk pressed unevenly across his lips. "Evening, Lucy," he drawled. "Sheriff wants a word." Lucy froze, clutching her bag. "I'm off the clock," she said quietly. Mullins pushed himself off the car and stopped inches from her, breath smelling of cigarettes. "Time to take that video down. You're hurting the town's image." Lucy tried to step back, but Mullins grabbed her wrist, reaching for her phone. Fear surged through her chest, her breath shallow. For a split second, she thought no one would come. But then she heard footsteps. Steady, calm, purposeful. Jim Walker stepped out from behind the diner, his tall frame unmistakable even in the dim light. His military cold-weather parka caught the glow of the street lamp, and his steel-blue eyes were locked on Mullins. Rex was beside him, hackles raised, a low, rumbling growl vibrating through the air. Jim's voice was quiet, but firm. "Let her go." Mullins stiffened, hand still on Lucy's phone. Rex took one step forward, lips lifting just enough to show teeth. Mullins let go instantly, stumbling backward as if burned. He tried to recover his pride, muttering, "You shouldn't be here, stranger," before retreating into the shadows. Lucy's knees wobbled as Jim steadied her, his hand gentle but reassuring, her voice cracked. "They're desperate," Jim nodded. "Desperate men make mistakes." Rex brushed against her leg briefly, offering comfort. Lucy inhaled shakily and whispered her thanks. Jim walked her to her car and waited until she drove away safely, Rex sitting alert at his side like a silent guardian. Jim knew this was only the beginning. Mullins wasn't acting alone. Someone higher up had given the order. Later that night, Jim drove toward Martha Reed's house, his instincts prickling. The road leading to her property was dark, lit only by the headlights, slicing through the sand-filled wind. When he reached the old wooden house, he killed the engine. Something felt wrong. Rex felt it too. His body stiffened, nose raised as he sniffed the air. Jim stepped out quietly, scanning the yard. Two men stood near the fence, silhouettes against the moonlight, large figures wearing dark jackets, their posture tense. They kicked at Martha's old mailbox, rocking the post back and forth as if trying to provoke a reaction. Jim walked onto the porch silently, his boots barely creaking on the wooden boards. When the two men moved closer to Martha's door, he flicked on the porch light. The sudden brightness startled them. Jim stood tall, arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Rex stood beside him, teeth bared just enough to promise consequences. The men weren't locals. Jim could tell from their polished boots and stiff posture. One had a shaved head and a jagged scar across his cheek, his face hard and expressionless. The other was leaner, with sharp features and dark stubble, his eyes restless like a cornered animal. They both froze when Jim's shadow fell across them. "Well," the scarred man muttered, "looks like Martha's got herself a watchdog." Jim didn't move. "Leave." His voice was low, steady, and cold enough to cut through the desert air. Rex stepped forward, claws scraping the porch. The lean man swallowed nervously. "We're just delivering a message," he said. Jim's eyes narrowed. "Message delivered. Now get off her property." The scarred man hesitated, sizing Jim up. Then Rex growled, deeper this time, a warning that echoed off the old siding. The men backed away reluctantly, muttering under their breath as they returned to a pickup truck parked farther down the road. Once they disappeared into the darkness, Jim exhaled slowly. Martha pulled open the door, her face pale. "I heard voices," she whispered. Jim reassured her gently. "They're gone." She held the door with trembling hands, gratitude and fear mixing in her gaze. "I didn't expect them to come so soon." Jim nodded. "They're testing reactions. Tonight was intimidation. Next time won't be." Rex nudged Martha's leg softly, as if promising protection. Jim stayed on the porch for a long time after, watching the road, the desert wind tugging at his parka. Rex sat beside him like a statue, eyes reflecting the moonlight. The corruption that gripped Dry Creek was tightening, trying to scare Lucy, silence the video, and break Martha's will. But the town had miscalculated. Jim Walker wasn't a man who ran anymore, not after what he'd seen, not after what he'd survived. He had stood against darkness before, and he would do it again here. Hours later, as the desert night deepened, a black SUV passed slowly at the edge of Martha's property before disappearing into the distance. Jim watched it until its taillights faded completely. Whoever was pulling the strings had realized something crucial. The outsider wasn't afraid, and fear was the weapon they relied on. Jim placed a hand on Rex's head. "We're not backing down," he whispered. Rex gave a soft, resolute growl, mirroring his master's conviction. Dry Creek slept uneasily that night, shadows shifting with every gust of wind. But on Martha Reed's porch, Jim Walker remained standing, a silent figure against the darkness. For the first time in years, corruption had encountered resistance, and it wasn't prepared for the fight ahead. The cold morning air swept across Dry Creek, carrying the tension that had tightened around the town ever since Lucy's video went viral. In the mayor's large Victorian-style house near the courthouse, Claire Briggs stood alone in the living room, staring at her tablet screen. Claire Briggs was a woman in her mid-40s, with soft brown hair styled neatly to her shoulders, pale skin that revealed stress easily, and warm hazel eyes now full of dread. She watched the clip of Martha Reed being slapped. First once, then again, as if her conscience forced her to replay it until she could no longer breathe. She pressed her trembling hand to her lips, whispering, "My God, what have we become?" Claire locked the door to the study and paced slowly, the polished wooden floor creaking beneath her heels. She had always been gentle, refined, the type who volunteered at school fairs and baked charity pies, but beneath her grace was a heart worn down by years of silence, She suspected her husband Leonard Briggs was involved with Silver Basin's dirty deals, sudden cash, late nights, vague excuses, but she forced herself to look away. Now, after seeing an elderly woman humiliated and struck, guilt crushed her chest. She approached Leonard's oak desk and whispered, "I can't ignore this anymore." The study smelled of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Framed campaign photos lined the walls, showing Leonard with his blonde hair slicked back, always smiling confidently. Claire ran her fingers across the desk before crouching down, remembering something. Months ago, she had noticed Leonard hiding something behind the bottom drawer. With steady determination, she pulled the drawer out completely and found a small leather pouch taped underneath. Inside was a silver key marked SB7. Her breath tightened. She knew SB stood for Silver Basin. She walked to the hidden safe behind the painting of Old Dry Creek hanging on the wall. The painting swung open on a discreet hinge when she pulled it. Claire inserted the SB7 key and heard a crisp, metallic click. The small safe door opened to reveal a sleek black USB drive engraved with the letters SB in polished silver. Beside it lay 2 envelopes of cash and stacks of folded documents stamped "Confidential." Claire picked up the USB with both hands, as though it weighed far more than it should. She plugged it into Leonard's laptop, fingers trembling. The screen flashed open. Permit modifications, PDF, payment logs 2023.xlsx, Duffy settlement, docx, and a chilling folder labeled Family Actions. When she opened it, a shockwave ran through her. Notes detailing the handling of families who refused to sell, including the missing Lewis family and Martha Reed, labeled simply as Last Obstacle. Claire closed the laptop and covered her face, tears sliding quietly down her cheeks. She felt something inside her collapse. All her suspicions were true, but the cruelty in those records cut deeper than she expected. She whispered, "Leonard, how far did you fall?" She inhaled shakily, then straightened her back. She wasn't strong in the way people thought heroes were, but she finally understood that courage wasn't loud. It was choosing truth over silence. She slipped the USB into her coat pocket, left the study, and stepped outside into the cold dusk, walking away from a home built on lies. The small stone chapel on the south side of Dry Creek stood quiet beneath the fading light. Its old wooden door groaned softly as Claire pushed it open. Inside, a few candles flickered near the altar, casting warm ripples across the pews. In the front row sat Martha Reed, the 78-year-old widow with silver hair tied neatly in a bun, wearing her cream wool sweater and hand-knitted shawl. Her thin hands rested in her lap as she prayed softly. Claire approached with hesitant footsteps. "Mrs. Reed?" Martha turned, her pale blue eyes calm despite the faint bruise still on her cheek. "Yes, dear," she answered kindly. Claire sat beside her, the USB clutched tightly in her hand. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice trembling. Then everything spilled out. Leonard's ties to Victor Crane, the bribery lists, the manipulated permits, families forced out or threatened, and the payments to Sheriff Duffy. Martha listened silently, her aged face composed but sorrowful. Claire finally placed the USB into Martha's hands. "This is all the proof," Claire whispered. "I should have acted sooner. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry for what my husband became." Martha gently rested her wrinkled hand over Claire's. "You are doing the brave thing now," Martha said tenderly. "Courage doesn't always come early, but it matters when it finally arrives." Claire's tears flowed again, but this time from release rather than despair. The chapel door creaked open then, and Jim Walker stepped inside. tall, broad-shouldered, wearing his military cold-weather parka with the high collar and double zipper. His steel-blue eyes swept the room cautiously, and Rex, his loyal German shepherd, stood alert beside him. Jim moved closer with respectful quietness. Claire looked up at Jim, her fear replaced by fragile hope. "Jim, I think you're the only one who can help us," she whispered. Martha explained briefly what Claire had brought. Jim took the USB carefully, his face tightening as he understood its significance. "This is enough to bring them down," he murmured. Rex nudged Jim's leg, ears perked, sensing tension. Claire stood shakily, but with a new sense of resolve, ready to bear the consequences of choosing truth. Jim placed a gentle, steady hand on Claire's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "We'll take it from here." Martha nodded slowly, a quiet agreement passing between them. Outside, the wind howled against the chapel walls, as if Dry Creek itself braced for what was coming. Jim slipped the USB into his jacket pocket, eyes hardened with purpose. "Tonight changes everything," he said. Martha rose, leaning lightly on the pew for balance, her eyes bright with hope. Claire watched them both and realized justice finally had someone willing to carry it. And Dry Creek would never be the same again. The wind over Dry Creek howled through the early morning hours as Jim Walker sat inside his small rented cabin, the old military laptop glowing dimly on the wooden table. Jim, wearing his thick military cold-weather parka unzipped just enough to breathe, typed steadily with a calm precision that came from years of discipline. Rex lay at his feet, the black and tan German shepherd watching the door with alert eyes. On the screen, encrypted messages appeared and disappeared as Jim contacted people he trusted. Former service members now working in cybersecurity, investigative journalists he once protected overseas, and a veteran-run non-profit that specialized in exposing corruption in rural towns. For the first time since arriving in Dry Creek, Jim's expression shifted from quiet restraint to focused determination. The truth needed to go out, and he would ensure it did. Across the country, in busy urban newsrooms and small law offices, messages from Jim arrived like sparks in a dry forest. One of the journalists Jim trusted most, Daniel Mercer, a sharp-featured man in his late 30s with dark hair always tied back in a loose bun, opened the files with widening eyes. Daniel was known for his relentless pursuit of truth and had once won awards for exposing a mining company's cover-up. When he saw the documents from the USB, bribe lists, manipulated permits, and the chilling family actions memos, he muttered, "This is bigger than I thought." Meanwhile, attorney Grace Lynn, a soft-spoken but fierce civil rights lawyer with short black hair and piercing eyes, began drafting legal requests for federal involvement. She had seen corruption before, but never so organized. Each new file Jim sent sharpened her resolve. By midday, an investigative team had already confirmed the authenticity of key documents. Grace Lynn contacted a federal agent she trusted at the Department of Justice, Agent Russell Hayes, a tall man with a trimmed beard and calm, authoritative demeanor. Agent Hayes had a reputation for integrity and hated small-town corruption rings that preyed on vulnerable people. When Hayes saw the folder marked Family Actions, he slammed his palm on the desk. "We're going in," he said. Meanwhile, journalists prepared their exposés, lawyers drafted affidavits, and cyber experts traced money transfers hidden by the Silver Basin Development Group. Jim watched his inbox fill with messages, approvals, confirmations, requests for more evidence. The machine of justice had awakened. That evening, while Dry Creek's main street settled into its usual uneasy quiet, the world outside was already shifting. News alerts broke across national outlets. Silver Basin Corruption Network under federal investigation. Articles detailed Victor Crane's financial empire, the suspicious land acquisitions around Dry Creek, and the payments funneled into the mayor's office and sheriff's department. Leonard Briggs, usually cool and composed in public, now paced inside his office, running his hands through his blonde hair until it stuck up in disarray. His once bright blue eyes were swollen and red. Papers lay scattered on the floor as he muttered to himself, "This can't be happening. Not now." The mayor, who built his career on charm, now looked like a man collapsing under the weight of his own greed. Sheriff Earl Duffy reacted very differently. The sheriff, a heavy-built man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a face creased by both stress and arrogance, stormed through the police station slamming doors as officers watched nervously. His uniform was wrinkled, his badge slightly tilted, as if even it refused to sit properly on a corrupt chest. "It's lies," he barked. "All of it." But his deputies exchanged glances. They knew the truth, even if they'd been too afraid to admit it. Duffy locked himself inside his office and tried making frantic phone calls to Victor Crane, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. For the first time in years, Sheriff Duffy felt fear seep into his bones. Before sunrise, the distant sound of engines echoed through the desert hills, this time not from ranch trucks, but from federal vehicles. 3 black SUVs and 2 state patrol cruisers rolled into Dry Creek. Agent Russell Hayes stepped out first, tall and steady, wearing a dark jacket with DOJ markings and carrying an evidence file. Behind him, state troopers flanked the police station. Inside, Duffy had barely risen from his chair when the doors burst open. Agent Hayes held out a sealed warrant. "Sheriff Earl Duffy," he said clearly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and participation in a criminal racketeering network." Officers did not hesitate. They cuffed the sheriff as he shouted curses, face turning purple. Townspeople gathered outside, watching the law finally reclaim their town. While the arrest made waves across Dry Creek, another storm brewed miles away. Victor Crane, the mastermind behind Silver Basin, had holed up in a penthouse hotel suite in Las Vegas. Crane was in his early 50s, a handsome but cold man with silver-streaked hair, angular jawline, and eyes that showed calculation rather than emotion. He wore a dark tailored suit and held a glass of whiskey as he watched news reports unfolding on a giant screen. His breathing was sharp, shallow. "Who leaked it?" he growled. His assistant, Dana Holt, the sharp-eyed woman with cropped black hair who once carried out his orders without question, now stood silently at the corner of the room. "Pack everything," Crane ordered. "We're leaving." But before he could finish his drink, a breaking headline sent chills through him. Federal warrant issued for businessman Victor Crane. Back in Dry Creek, Leonard Briggs stumbled out of City Hall, shoulders hunched, tie loosened, eyes glassy. Reporters from nearby towns had already arrived after the news broke. Cameras flashed as Briggs tried to wave them off. His voice cracked as he attempted to speak. I had no idea, I never... But he stopped mid-sentence when he saw Claire standing across the street. Claire Briggs, with her brown hair pinned neatly and her hazel eyes filled not with anger but profound disappointment, watched him silently. Briggs's face crumpled. He knew she had discovered everything. He took one step toward her, then sank onto the courthouse steps, burying his face in his hands. His political career ended in a single breath. The news continued to spread rapidly. Every file from the USB had been verified and cross-checked. Payment records matched bank logs, contract alterations linked directly to City Hall, and Sheriff Duffy's signature appeared on settlement forms for families who relocated. Investigative articles exposed how Silver Basin attempted to strangle Dry Creek with fear, forcing residents to sell land under threats. In interviews, victims finally spoke out, voices trembling but relieved. The Lewis cousins described the fire that took their family home. An elderly man recalled being told accidents happen if he refused to sell. The town's buried horrors surfaced, and the nation listened. As Dry Creek reeled from the revelations, Jim Walker walked along the quiet street with Rex at his side. Jim's steps were steady, controlled, but behind his cold expression was a flicker of relief. He didn't enjoy exposing people or tearing down power structures, but protecting the innocent was the only mission that ever mattered to him. Residents who had once avoided eye contact now stepped out of doorways to nod gratefully at him. "Thank you, Jim," one said softly. Another placed a hand on his arm. Jim nodded curtly, not needing recognition. Rex walked close, tail low and alert, his calm presence grounding Jim as the town finally breathed freer air. By late afternoon, Dry Creek transformed from a place suffocated by fear into a town cautiously hopeful. Duffy was behind bars, Briggs was finished, and Victor Crane was on the run with federal agents tracking him. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the dirt roads, but the feeling in the air had shifted. Something dark had lifted. Jim stood at the edge of town, with Rex beside him, watching the lights of the federal vehicles fade into the horizon. The wind rustled the dust around his boots, and the cold touched his face. But for the first time since he arrived, Dry Creek felt like a place reclaiming its soul. Jim whispered, "It's just the beginning," and Rex leaned gently against his leg as if agreeing. Justice had arrived, and Dry Creek would never again bow to corruption. The sun rose gently over Dry Creek, casting soft golden light across the town that had for so long lived under a gray weight of fear. Now the air felt different, warmer, freer, like the desert wind finally carried something cleaner. Jim Walker walked down the main street with Rex trotting close beside him, observing the subtle signs of change. The boarded windows of old houses were being repaired, paint cans sat beside porches, and people greeted one another with a revived hope. The atmosphere no longer felt tense. The nightmare that once hovered over Dry Creek had finally lifted, replaced by cautious optimism. Jim paused briefly, taking it all in. Rex sniffed the air, tail relaxed, sensing peace for the first time since they arrived. Across town, workers hammered new planks onto the homes that had been neglected during the Silver Basin intimidation campaign. Many residents who once stayed hidden indoors now stepped outside with relief, their faces no longer shadowed by anxiety. A group of young men who formerly worked under Victor Crane, recognizable by their rough tattoos and muscular builds, now carried lumber and shingles, helping rebuild the same town they had once been pressured to scare. One of them, a man in his early 30s named Cole Hartley, tall with a shaved head and a scar across his eyebrow, approached an elderly couple and apologized with earnest eyes. His voice cracked as he promised to make amends. The couple accepted with tears in their eyes, and Cole returned to work with renewed purpose. Near the lake, Claire Briggs stood holding a clipboard, helping organize volunteer teams. She wore a light denim jacket over a soft white blouse, her brown hair tied neatly into a bun. Her hazel eyes, once filled with guilt, now glowed with determination. Claire directed workers with a quiet authority, ensuring the lakeside area was restored into a community park instead of a restricted resort zone. Children ran along the dirt paths, chasing each other while parents watched with relieved smiles. Claire paused to look at the clear water, reflecting on how close the town had come to losing everything. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, knowing redemption was not only possible, it had truly begun. Angels rest, Diner, once Lone Spur Diner, now bore a fresh new sign hand-painted by locals. The building had been cleaned, repainted in warm colors, and decorated with flowers offered by grateful townsfolk. Inside, Lucy Harmon moved swiftly between tables with a confidence she had never shown before. Her brown curly hair bounced behind her, and the freckles on her face stood out brightly under the warm lights. Lucy, now the manager, carried herself with pride. Her smile was genuine as she greeted customers who had returned after months of avoiding the diner due to intimidation. The atmosphere buzzed with comfort, the sound of clinking dishes and light laughter replacing tension and whispers. In the center of the diner sat Martha Reed, now lovingly called Grandma of Dry Creek. Dressed in her cream sweater and knitted shawl, the 78-year-old widow held a warm mug of tea while residents took turns thanking her for her courage. Her silver-gray hair glowed under the lights as she chuckled softly at each visitor. Children gathered around her, listening to stories she told about Dry Creek's past. Times when neighbors helped neighbors and fear had no place. Her pale blue eyes, once filled with pain after Brent Halpern's attack, now shone with gentle pride. Martha represented the heart of the town, the reminder that courage from even one person could shift an entire community. On the outskirts of town, crews dismantled the last remaining Silver Basin construction signs, the same ones that once symbolized oppression. Men rolled up fencing that had been prepared to block lake access, loading it into trucks. A small group of volunteers installed benches, planting new desert shrubs along the path. Cole Hartley and 2 former crane workers placed a memorial plaque near the water. To those who stood for truth. When Jim passed by, they nodded with respect. Cole stepped forward and offered Jim a firm handshake. "Thank you for giving us a chance to fix what we helped break," Cole said quietly. Jim nodded, not with judgment, but with the understanding of a man who had seen both darkness and redemption in others. As the day warmed, Jim visited Claire Briggs near the Community Lake Project. Claire showed him a binder filled with updated land records, proof that all illegal transfers had been overturned. Her voice was steady as she explained how the state had granted Dry Creek protected status for the lakeside area, ensuring it could never again be targeted by predatory developers. Jim listened, arms folded over his parka, his steel blue eyes scanning the papers with quiet satisfaction. Claire offered him a soft, grateful smile. "None of this would have happened without you, Jim." He replied simply, "It happened because people chose to be brave." Rex stood between them, ears perked, watching ducks glide across the water. Later in the afternoon, townspeople gathered at Angel's Rest Diner to celebrate. Lucy prepared a simple feast, home-baked rolls, grilled chicken, and peach cobbler. The diner buzzed with lively conversation, the kind Jim rarely stayed long for. People raised glasses to honor Martha Reed, to thank Claire Briggs, and to acknowledge the former Silver Basin workers who tried to make amends. A few attempted to include Jim in the circle of praise, but he shook his head politely and stayed near the back of the room. Jim felt at ease only in quiet corners, and Rex lay beside him under the table, content among friendly faces, yet always alert to his surroundings. As the sun dipped behind the desert ridge, Jim stepped outside the diner. The sky burned orange and red, casting long shadows across the newly restored main street. Residents lingered outside, waving and thanking him again. Jim nodded in return, but his heart already felt the familiar restlessness of a wanderer who knew his time in one place was temporary. Rex leaned against Jim's leg, sensing that a change was coming. Jim looked down at the loyal German shepherd, gently rubbing behind his ears. "We did what we came to do," he murmured. "Time to move on, buddy." The next morning, Jim loaded supplies into the back of his old pickup truck. The desert wind carried a fresh breeze, whispering through the quiet early streets. Martha Reed walked slowly toward him, supported by her cane. Jim met her halfway, offering an arm. Martha placed her hand over his and smiled warmly. "You protected this town," she said. "And you protected me. I won't forget it." Jim bowed his head respectfully. "You gave them the courage to stand up, ma'am. I just helped clear the way." Martha chuckled, her pale eyes shining. "Wherever you're headed next, Jim, may God lead your steps." Jim opened the truck door, and Rex hopped inside, tail wagging slightly. Lucy hurried out of the diner and handed Jim a paper bag filled with sandwiches for the road. Claire Briggs stepped onto the sidewalk, her expression filled with gratitude and a hint of sadness. Townspeople lined the street, waving as Jim started the engine. With one last nod to the people he had helped liberate, Jim drove toward the open desert highway. Rex stuck his head slightly out the window, letting the warm wind rush through his fur. Behind them, Dry Creek stood reborn, stronger, braver, and ready for its future. And somewhere down the road, if another Martha needed help, Jim and Rex would once again be there. When Dry Creek was drowning in fear, God didn't send lightning from the sky. He sent people. A brave widow, a young woman with a camera, a wife who chose truth, a veteran who stood up when everyone else stayed silent, and a loyal dog who guarded his side like an angel. These were God's miracles. And just like them, you can be a miracle in someone's darkest moment. Hold on to faith. Choose what's right. Stand up when it matters. If this story touched your heart, please share, comment, and subscribe to spread hope to others. May God bless you and fill your days with quiet, powerful miracles.